We've spoken a lot about how to break through writer's block and procrastination to actually get your book written. But what we're going to do today is talk about what do you do when you get to the other side of that. So what do you do when you actually finish your first draft and you've done it? You've written your book. You've typed those magic words, the end, and then you've closed the document and you felt joy and relief that finally the first draft was done. But then a few days later, you opened it up and the relief disappeared because now you're looking at a document full of scenes that maybe don't quite work, chapters that feel too long or too short, dialogue that sounds a bit stiff, plot threads that you forgot to resolve, and a general sense that what you thought was a finished book might actually just be a very long, messy set of notes. So now what? If the thought of revising your first draft fills you with dread, or worse, if it's made you wonder whether the whole thing is even salvageable, stay with me, because today we're going to completely change how you think about revision, what it actually asks of you, and how to approach your first draft in a way that is calm, strategic, and genuinely exciting. And yes, I said exciting. And I'm also going to give you hints, tips, and tricks for your writing personality regarding how to revise. So stay with me. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Madison Michaels, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Write the Darn Book. I'm your host, Madison Michaels, and today we're talking about one of the most under-discussed and honestly the most misunderstood parts of the whole writing process. What to actually do after you've finished your first draft. We're going to look at the mindset that can sometimes make revision feel impossible, why your first draft being a mess is genuinely great news, and a calm 5-pass approach to moving from that messy draft towards a final finished book. Let's start here. So why does finishing a first draft feel like such a strange kind of victory sometimes? You've done something genuinely hard. You've sat down and across days and weeks and even months, and you've produced a thing that didn't exist before you created it. There's a draft with your name on it, and it is worth acknowledging properly, not in passing. It's such an achievement to get to that point. But here's what tends to happen almost immediately. The celebration of finishing, of typing that at the end, at the last page, gives way to a sense of awareness that perhaps everything isn't necessarily working in the book, and you start seeing the gaps, the inconsistencies, the scenes that were meant to be pivotal but somehow landed flat, the ending that maybe still doesn't feel quite right. And instead of seeing all of that as the normal expected state of a first draft, many writers experience it as evidence that they've failed, that the draft is bad, that maybe they're just not good enough to make this work. And I want to name that feeling because it's so common, it's almost universal, and it's completely disconnected from the truth of what's actually happening. Here's what I want you to understand. The gap between a first draft and a finished book isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's the process. The first draft is not the destination. It is the raw material. And raw material is supposed to be rough. There's a quote that's often attributed to Hemingway, and whether or not he actually said it, the sentiment is real. The first draft of everything is, and I'm paraphrasing here, not very good. And every published author that you've ever admired has a first draft that looks no way like their published book, not one of them. The transformation from first draft to book is the craft. And today we're going to talk about how to begin that transformation without losing your mind. I want to tell you a story about my first book, The Devilish Duke, because it's honestly one of the best illustrations I know of everything we're talking about today. I'd wanted to write that book for years, and I finally finished the first draft in 2010. But not in a calm, steady, everything is fine kind of way. I finished it because I had a deadline with real consequences attached to it. Here's what happened. I submitted a partial manuscript to apply for a 5-day retreat for emerging authors, and it was a fantastic program being run by Romance Writers of Australia, where you'd get to be mentored if you were selected for the program, but you'd get to be mentored intensively by a multi-published author across the 5 days. So it was this really intensive 5-day program. And I was so excited because I got accepted, which was fantastic news. But as part of actually being accepted, you had to then submit a completed manuscript. And I think we had maybe 2 to 4 weeks to get it in. So at that point in time, my manuscript was maybe only 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the way through. So I had a lot of writing to still do to get it finished. So I jumped in because I had so much motivation and a very firm deadline. And I knew I had to finish this book, otherwise I wouldn't be part of the program. So literally every weekend that I was free, I'd be writing. And one weekend I actually wrote 36,000 words over the Friday night, all day Saturday night, and Sunday as well. And I haven't replicated that since, so don't take that as gospel for how much you should be writing. But I was so motivated that I was able to get the book written and submitted, and I attended the retreat, and it was amazing. I was mentored by the lovely Annie James, who writes as Sophia James for Harlequin, and the guidance she gave me was absolutely gold. It shaped how I thought about craft in so many ways, and I still think about her advice to this day. But here's where it gets relevant to today's conversation. By the end of that retreat, I had pages and pages and pages of revision notes. Like, we had to actually print out the manuscript in hard copy. And then every day of the retreat, we'd spend one-on-one time with our mentor, and we'd go through, we'd make notes, we'd make editing, she'd make suggestions. Like, it was full on and so amazing. But by the end of it, I had a whole manuscript with so many suggestions and story adjustments to make, craft improvements to weave in, things that were absolutely going to genuinely make my book better. And I could see that clearly. And I looked at all of those notes and I felt utterly and completely overwhelmed. So when I got home, literally when I got home from the retreat, I put the manuscript into my desk drawer and I closed the drawer. So I put it out of sight, out of mind. I knew I needed to come back to it to edit it, but I honestly didn't want to come back to it at that stage because I knew how much work was there to do. I didn't go back to it the next week. I didn't go back to it the next month. That first draft of The Devilish Duke sat untouched in my drawer for 6 years. 6 years between finishing the draft and actually picking it back up to do the revision work. And don't get me wrong, life was happening in that time. I became a mum and had my baby girl, who's not a baby anymore, really. I was pursuing my career in the police, working towards becoming a prosecutor and a sergeant. So I had real life and real demands pressing on my time. But if I'm honest with myself, and I think this is important to say out loud, it wasn't only the busyness of everything that was happening in my life that kept me away from that manuscript. It was the overwhelming feeling that the revision and the edits were just too much to tackle. In the distance, I knew where the draft had to get to, But it just felt that where it was from where it had to be was such a huge bridge to cross. I just wasn't prepared to take the first step. Now, I know my own personality tendencies well enough now to understand what was actually happening. You see, I have strong owl traits. I'm predominantly an owl, but I also have eagle traits. Now, my owl traits allow that I hold my work to a really high standard and I can see clearly what something should be. Whereas my eagle traits provide that, yes, I'm driven and determined and I genuinely want to finish things. But when something feels too large and too undefined, the combination of these two personality tendencies don't always produce action. And sometimes those two combined personality traits can produce avoidance, because starting something that you can't see a clear path through feels worse than not starting at all. And that was exactly what was happening. Now, it wasn't until 2016 when I was at a writers' conference where something clicked. One of those moments where a thought lands just so differently than it ever has before. And I made the decision to pick the manuscript back up again, to revise it, to edit it, and to start submitting it. Because that was the moment I knew if I want to be an actual writer, I have to get the book finished. And just because I'd got the first draft finished did not mean the book was finished. And that meant I was going to have to do the revisions, the one thing I'd been avoiding to do for years. And here's what I discovered when I finally went back to that manuscript. It wasn't as catastrophic as I'd made it out to be in my head. Yes, the revisions were substantial. Let's face it, it was the first manuscript I had ever completely finished. So yeah, the first draft needed work. But the story was there. The characters were there. My voice was there. The draft I'd written in 2010 had the bones of the book. What it needed was shaping, not demolishing. And the overwhelm that had kept me away from it for 6 years was real. And it was also, in a large part, a story that I was telling myself about the size of the task rather than the actual size of the task itself. That's what I want to give you today. A way to approach revision that makes the task feel possible instead of paralyzing. Because your book doesn't have 6 years to wait. So let's talk about revision, what it actually is, what it requires of you as a writer, and a practical approach to moving through it without the panic. I want to start though with the most important reframe, because without this, no technique will help. And the reframe is this: your first draft was never supposed to be good. It was supposed to exist. This sounds simple, and it is actually quite radical when you internalize it. We spend so much energy in the drafting process trying to make it right the first time, every sentence, every scene, every piece of dialogue, and often we'll edit as we go. We reread yesterday's pages before we can write today's. We stall because what's on the page doesn't match what we imagined. And a huge part of that is because somewhere we believe the draft should be as close to finished on the first path. And it shouldn't. That's not what a draft is for. A first draft is for finding the story. Revision is where you shape it. And these are two very different creative acts. And trying to do them simultaneously is one of the most common reasons writers get stuck, where they slow down or whether they stop altogether. So the first thing I want you to do before you change a single word is give yourself full permission for your draft to be exactly as messy as it is. Not as a lowering of standards, but as an accurate understanding of what stage you're in. Now let's dive in to how to actually move through your draft. And I call this the 5-pass revision method. And the key to making it work is that each pass has a single focus. You're not trying to fix everything at once. You're doing one thing per read through. The reason most writers find revision overwhelming is that they sit down with the intention to fix it all. They read a sentence that doesn't land, they stop and rewrite it, they notice a pacing problem in a scene, then they try to fix it in the moment. And then they're 3 pages in, 2 hours have passed, and they feel like they're drowning. That's not revision. That's multitasking, and your brain's not built for it. Single focus passes change everything. So let's walk through them. Pass 1 is the story pass. This is your big picture read. You're not editing a single word. You're reading the story. So where does it stall? Where does it sing? Are there major story beats in the right places, or do they need to be moved? Does your protagonist have a clear arc? Does the ending earn what comes before it? You can take notes as you go, and in fact, I recommend you do. Short notes, not stopping to fix, just flagging areas that you've noticed are going to need some revision. Some writers do this pass on paper or in a different format than what they write on, because it creates just enough distance to help them read like a reader rather than the writer. Others do it on screen. Either way, though, the rule is the same. You're just observing, you're not correcting. Pass 2 is the scene pass. Now you go back to the beginning with your notes and you work scene by scene. For each scene, you're asking one question. Does this scene need to be here? And does it do at least 2 things? A scene should move the plot forward and reveal character, or create tension and deepen relationships, or any combination of story functions. If a scene is only doing one thing or doing nothing at all, it either needs to be cut or it needs to be deepened. And this is where you make structural decisions. And I'll be honest with you, this pass is where writers most often discover that the scenes that they were most attached to are the ones that need to go. And that's uncomfortable, especially because you've spent so much time writing it, yeah? So it's also how good books are made. The scenes that don't progress the book, that aren't actually contributing, they go. Now, pass 3 is the character pass, and this is one of my favourites because it's where the people in your story come alive. You're reading through each character's journey individually, not reading the whole book, but tracing each significant character's emotional arc. You're thinking and looking at it and assessing it as to, does it make sense? Does it feel earned? Is there consistency in how they speak, their actions, their thoughts, how they behave? Is their growth believable given what they've experienced? And this is also where you look at your characters through the lens of emotional drivers. So what does each character need? What are they afraid of? What do they want versus what do they actually need? And how does the tension play out across the story? When I work with writers on this in coaching, we often use the Bird personality framework here, asking which emotional drivers are at the core of each character and whether those drivers are actually showing up on the page. Often they're not, and that's why the character might feel flat. The character is doing the right things on the surface perhaps, but not revealing the emotional truth underneath. Pass 4 is the language pass. Now and only now do you go to sentence level, and you're reading it for how it sounds, how it flows, how your story reads aloud. And it's to cut down on overwriting, to tighten dialogue, to replace vague or abstract language with concrete, physical, embodied language, things that can be seen, heard, felt. If you read a sentence and it doesn't create anything in your body, no visual, no sensation, no sense of forward movement, then it probably needs some work. This is also where you look for your reoccurring crutch words, and we all have them, words that we overuse without realising it. Some writers say just 50 times in a manuscript. Others have a character who always smiled or nodded or looked away. So what you want to be doing is reading the manuscript for your word patterns and make choices about them. If you do notice a word creeping up or popping up several times in your manuscript, do a keyword search for it, a Control-F search, and actually see how many times you have used that word. That might give you a really good indication that you could be overusing it. This is where thesauruses come in really handy, so make use of them. Pass 5 is what I call the consistency pass. And this is your final check before you send your work to your editor or publisher or to your readers to get feedback before you actually do publish it. And here you're looking for continuity. So a character name that changes spelling midway through perhaps, or eye color that's shifted, a dress color that's changed, actual continuity errors in the manuscript. You also want to look here for any plot points that were set up but never actually paid off or finished, perhaps timelines that didn't quite work and need a little bit of work. So this pass benefits enormously from a simple document where you can track those character details, the location descriptions, and any facts that need to stay consistent across the whole manuscript. I use Scrivener myself to actually do my manuscripts in, and I use the character sheets. I keep track of the names, any particular distinctive features of that character. I also have a places section where I keep track of the places they've visited. I have a research section so I can quickly look at some research too. So I find Scrivener really handy to keep a track of these things. Now, I want to come back to mindset here because the technique only works if the thinking is aligned with how you are wired as a writer too. Now, writers, and this is almost universal in my experience coaching writers at every stage, tend to have a very complicated relationship with their work in revision. There's something really vulnerable about rereading something you made. There's a version of you that wrote those pages, and going back to them can sometimes mean evaluating the choices that version of you made. And if you're someone who struggles with perfectionism or self-doubt or imposter syndrome, that evaluation can feel a lot like judgment, not of the work, but of yourself. I want you to try something. When you open your draft for your story pass, see if you can approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. What's here? What's working? What wants to be better? Curiosity asks questions. Judgment delivers verdicts. The revision process requires curiosity, a willingness to stay open to what the story needs, even when what that story needs is something you didn't originally plan. Now, I've already told you my own story with this, the 6 years of parking my manuscript in a desk drawer because revision felt way too big. And I know from my own bird tendencies exactly why that happened. Remember, like I said, our writers hold their work to high standards, and that means they can see every gap between the draft and what it should be. Eagle writers are driven to finish, but when the path isn't clear, they can stall in the face of an undefined task. The combination of those two tendencies, high standards plus a need for a clear execution path, can make a larger revision feel immovable. It isn't, but it needs to be broken down. Dove writers often face a different challenge in revisions because doves tend towards harmony and attachment, and they find it very difficult to cut scenes that they love, scenes that might not actually be serving the story, but that feel meaningful to them personally. If you're a dove, your challenge in revision is giving yourself permission to let things go that aren't working and knowing that cutting them makes space for something better. Your emotional attunement is a gift in revision. The resistance to cutting out things in your manuscript is what you have to watch for. And for peacock writers, revision can feel like the least exciting part of the creative process when there's already a new idea forming for another book. So the 5-pass method works well for peacocks because it gives each pass a defined completable task. Finish this pass, then the next. It creates momentum without requiring you to live inside the draft indefinitely. Whatever your tendency, the passes are designed to make the work feel manageable rather than endless. One last thing before we get to your call to action today, and this one matters a lot. Remember that revision isn't the same as rewriting. Revision means looking again. Revision, literally. It means seeing your work with fresh eyes and making intentional choices about what stays, what goes, and what needs to change. Rewriting means starting the whole thing from scratch. Sometimes a rewrite is the right choice. There are manuscripts that fundamentally don't work structurally, and the kindest thing that you can do for them is to let them go and start fresh. But that's the exception, not the rule. Most first drafts aren't broken, they're just unfinished. The story is in there, the characters are there, your voice is in there. The revision process is about bringing all of that forward, not about destroying what you built and starting all again. So if you've opened up your first draft and the first thought you had was, oh, maybe I should just rewrite this from scratch, I want you to do the story pass before you make that call. Read the whole thing first. Find out what's actually there before you decide it isn't worth keeping. You might surprise yourself. All right, my friends, your call to action from today's episode is this. Schedule your first revision pass. Not, I'll do it when I feel ready. An actual date, an actual time, an actual window in your week. One session, do the story pass. You're not fixing anything. You're reading and you're noting what you find. That's it. And remember to make a note of some of the things that are really working, the good stuff in there too. Now, if you've been sitting on a finished draft for weeks or months because revision felt too big, too scary, or too undefined, today is the day that you put it in your calendar. Your story is waiting for you to come back to it. Remember, you're the only one that can write this story in your point of view, with your story ideas. It is your story and you are the vessel for it. Now, if you're also at the point where you know what you need to do, but you just can't make it stick on your own, that's exactly what writing coaching is for. I work one-to-one with writers at every stage, so whether you're staring at a blank page or halfway through a manuscript that's gone cold, or you've finished it and you don't know what to do now, start with a free 15-minute clarity call. There's no commitment, it's just a conversation. Head to madisonmichaels.com/call or find the link in the show notes. Remember, my friends, revision isn't the end of writing. It's the beginning of turning what you wrote into what you meant to write. And that is honestly one of the most satisfying parts of the whole creative writing process, when you see the book becoming itself. The other week, I literally just finished the developmental edits with my editor for my new book series coming out, the first book in the series, The Jack of Hearts. And honestly, I loved the process. Thankfully, it wasn't a huge amount of edits, and that comes with time. The more manuscripts that you write and have to edit and revise, you will honestly get better, and that revision process will get less. But it helped to really just cut out things that weren't needed, to refine everything, and to make the story as polished and as wonderful as it could be. And I'm genuinely so excited for you all to read it because I loved it. I loved reading it back. I loved actually changing a few things around and making it the version of itself that I had first anticipated in my mind. It really is so satisfying. Remember, you've done the hardest thing by actually writing the first draft. That is literally one of the hardest things, and some people never get to that point. They always want to write a book, but they never actually finish doing it. So if you have gotten to that point, if you've written the first draft, you do need to congratulate yourself and be proud. Then you have to get it in shape, okay? Because you are the vessel for your story. Sometimes we just have to step out of our own way and let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, so have fun revising and polishing up your first draft, and I'll see you in the next episode of Write the Darn Book. Take care, and let's write the darn book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, you're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. Alright, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.